All right, what is up, everybody? Today, I have the pleasure of having EliGE join me for the podcast, and this is kind of crazy, EliGE, because you're giving me like this moment in your career, which is really fresh, where you've just joined FaZe, which is amazing. You know, your career is 11 years. Is that right?
Well, I started in 2015 when I joined Liquid, so starting at gonna be 10 years, yeah.
10 years. Okay, so we're 10 years in. This is your first international lineup, right? You've not had many teams.
If you don't count the Liquid international lineups that we've had, then yeah, technically this is my first one. So yeah, super excited about it.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I think this is probably the place I have to start because it's really huge news for so many people. You have so many fans for so many reasons. I'm sure we're going to touch on some of those reasons in this conversation. So exiting complexity, exiting Liquid. You've been with these North American brands for so long. With your joining into FaZe, is it the case that this is the right time, right opportunity to join an international roster, or have you for a long time just really wanted to be a part of getting an NA team to the absolute heights of winning a major, for example? How have you looked at this over the course of your career?
For me, this is pretty much like the right time, right place, everything just kind of falling in line of what I want and what I think is possible. So I wanted to be on a team that can win trophies and win championships. And I think that in NA, it's just going to be really hard to do that unless you move to Europe because there's just not enough practice partners. I think there's just a lot of things going against being able to succeed while living in NA. And then, if I'm going to be living in Europe, I might as well, try to be on like the best team possible, in my opinion. And that's why I pretty much like went the route that I did.
It's really interesting because having spent so much time in North America, you've also, of course, like firsthand, sort of you've gone from being the young kid to then being the veteran that's kind of fostering and nurturing the new talent coming up in the scene. So just quickly, staying on the NA scene for the moment. What's your interpretation of the sort of transformation of the NA scene over time? Are you a lot more optimistic, than maybe you once were? How are you looking at sort of the new talent? Are the new talent a lot more advanced than the new talent used to be in NA? Like, what's the transformation of the NA scene been like, from your perspective?
Well, I think that we've had ups and downs. I think that since Valorant, we've had a lot less talents that have been like showing up in the scene. And I think that is just like a very tough situation because you're not just going to have like a donk or a Monacy just like popping up out of nowhere because for donk and Monacy to be as great as they are and like coming up the way that they did, I guess I'll say more specifically like donk and Kyosuke. They came through like an academy lineup. They're also like grinding super hard in pugs. And it's not like they aren't playing like super top tier competition because they're doing it that way. It's like they're able to like practice against the best teams in the world. I don't know how many times they're playing like the tier 1 teams, but I'm sure they're getting plenty of tier 2, some tier 1 teams that they're able to scrim against while they were coming up. And also the pugs are just much more higher level. If you watch any pug of like donk or Kyosuke, because those are the hot topic names, of course, and donk is the best player in the world for good reason. The pugs can kind of look like a scrim because they're just trying like super hard. Everyone is up to date with the meta and they understand like what the strats like kind of look like. They're not calling anything crazy, but it's normal stuff of like normal team play things that are like happening in the games. You know what I mean? Like nothing crazy. And when I'm playing like an NA in the pugs, it's just not even close to the same thing. Like there's the level of trying hard and knowing meta type strats is just like not at the same level. So yeah, I think that there's just like a very like big barrier for NA players to have like some crazy star just like popping up in that same category of skill. You know what I mean? So I think that there's just a lot. It's going to be a lot harder for new talents to shine as bright as European ones.
So it really sounds like you're talking about the cultural difference in a sense. Okay, the region sort of takes it more seriously, but they also have the resources to do so because there's a lot of reinforcing elements because there's so much competition. So you really have to, through necessity, try really hard and just level up your game as much as possible. And you're not getting those things in North America. I know that just looking back at some of my own experience playing in the past, I was in the better region, and I always looked at North America, which was the worst region, and also in my Quake days, and I was like, man, I felt like it must be such a struggle for people to be in that region and to grow. And it would always be the case that you get a select few talents, but other than that, similar to North America in Counter-Strike, you don't really see much. And I was always relieved I didn't have to deal with that problem, because the top players in North America were still the top players, and they were still able to compete with the best in Europe. But it was definitely much more of a struggle from a practice point of view. So you must be very aware, just if you've described the problem, that you're in this environment. So how have you tried to mitigate that so that you can keep your own game evolving when you are in a spot where you're pugging and so on? Have you had to come up with any creative ways to mitigate that, or is there just not a way to really mitigate that?
Well, I've obviously played in North America my entire career. I felt like pugging was just a complete waste of time, pretty much always. I think the only time that I ever enjoyed pugging was when I was in Europe. And when I do pug in NA, it would usually just be for fun. Like, I'm just playing with my friends, but I'm not looking at it from a point of view of I'm practicing this way, because I would do that at times, even more recently, and the expectations are just completely not aligned of what I'm expecting. If I'm trying to call things that I think that would be super simple, the visualization is just not there. Where the understanding of what I'm trying to call and in those pugs just isn't there. So it just would be a losing game, I guess. So I would pretty much just try to play with friends, and I would do my own things of how I think is the best way to improve from the resources that I have. So, using refrag or aim trainers, focusing on DM, focused practice. I would do what I can in pugs, but I know that it's not the same level that I can play when I'm playing in Europe, for example. So I would just try to find other ways to do that. I watch a lot of demos and POVs, so I'm always staying up to date on everything that I can and trying to really get into the game as I'm watching those and seeing how I would think during those games. So I pretty much have to go around myself playing in pugs to get that same practice when I'm playing in my own free time.
I think it's a really interesting that you talk about this, because especially because it's you. And I think one thing that we'll probably touch on as a theme in this conversation is, at least my interpretation of you is you've been a player that throughout your entire career you've always tried to push yourself, and you've always tried to gain any edge at sort of any cost, which requires a lot of discipline and a lot of drive and work ethic that you're constantly seemingly reinforcing all the time. And that's obviously that's a really high bar to clear for most people for the amount of time that you've done it. And so I think it's really interesting to hear that that perspective from you. And similarly, I'm curious about when you're learning from, let's say, these players like you mentioned, a Donk or a Monacy, are you spending a lot of time studying what there is to learn about players that pop up that are extremely good? How does it look like for you? How does that take part in your process when it learning from other players? Is that a big focus or not?
It definitely is. I think that it's something that I've done a lot more recently. It's something that I kind of lost at the end of Liquid, and I kind of got back to what was making me me. And what works best for me is analyzing all these players and seeing what works best for them. And that's how creativity is fostered as well. You're going to be piggybacking off of ideas that you see other players do. When I'm watching POVs, just standard, I'll see them do an idea, and then I'm like, okay, well, I can level up this idea. And then, someone else sees me do whatever thing that I just did, and then they're thinking, oh, I can level that up. So it's just this reinforcing, creativity spiral that kind of happens when you're watching other good players. You're going to see what their idea is, or you're going to think of whatever it is, and you're going to make it fit your needs. So I've always thought of that, especially from the StarCraft sense of when you're watching things, you can get so much out of it. And, when I'm watching Donk, who's the best player in the world right now, I focus a lot more on his micro and his rotations. He has a really cool way of when he wins duels of employing different micros that I can also employ more as well. So that's something that I'm kind of focusing on of, what made him win the duel, like what is like helping him the most. And when I take away like those key concepts and I can apply them to my game, then I can improve at like a faster rate.
So when you're talking about those macros, for people that might be sort of less familiar with that terminology, what would be a good way for you to sort of like maybe describe what's actually happening in those moments, or what are those small decisions that Donk is making?
Well, I know that a lot of people have like mentioned like the donk slide and stuff, but so essentially what it is there's always going to be different ways that you can be winning duels, like when you're fighting. It's how far you're strafing out. Are you going to do like a wide strafe or a short strafe? Are you going out a little bit more than what you expect the other guy's crosshair placement to be, or are you going exactly there and you're employing a crouch? Are you going to swing out wide and then counter strafe and then going to like a spray? Are you going to spray like as you're like going to the left and then doing like this kind of like X spray? I don't know how to describe it very well, but there's just different ways that you can be winning duels. And I think that James also has a really good YouTube that kind of talks about the micros of how the players are going throughout their round of, are they peeking on the back wall or the front wall? Are they like jiggling twice on the back wall and then they go close and then they do like a wide strafe? So I think that there's a lot of different like micro techniques that you see these players just naturally employ. And once you break that down, you can start adding it to your own game of like, okay, when would I want to do this? And once you think of like when you want to, then you start practicing and then become second nature and then you don't think about it anymore. So it's kind of like the conscious competence, unconscious competence, unconscious, all that stuff, type of learning of when you fully understand something of you employing its second nature.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that model is like really, really awesome. Everyone should know that if they're interested in learning anything. What was it, like 4 stages of competency, something like that?
It's the 4 stages of learning, I believe.
Of learning. Okay.
Yeah, but I think competence, it might be both. It probably has both charts, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely good stuff. I have a video on this, I think, somewhere in my channel. Anyway, what are some other players that have similarly inspired you? I think because Donk is Donk's one of the most obvious ones, obviously, that I think everyone's like, well, of course, you'd be looking at Donk, but so I guess like two categories I could ask you in terms of this question of players you've looked at. So what are some players you feel like you've gotten the most from, and then what are some players that you've learned something from that might surprise people, maybe because they're not as well known?
So I usually have like a bunch of players that like as soon as I see them, like on like a POV channel, for example, I'll definitely watch like if they had a good game. And sometimes I'll even watch players that don't necessarily play my role. Like for example, I like watching Rops. He plays a lot of different positions compared to me, but he has a lot of really good ideas, and the way that he micros, the way that he like clears angles is completely different if you watch like me or Donk. The way that Rops does it is just completely different. So I like watching players that have like a different style like that. I like watching Queserado, Frozen, Exertion, Bit. I think the ones that I've learned the most from is from a micro perspective has been like Bit, Rops, Donk, that I've watched the most. So I try to like watch as many of like the players that are like kind of popping off like in my spots that I can, and also just the ones that I think are really good individually, because I think that you can learn a lot from them even if you don't necessarily play their positions. You can definitely employ a lot of the things that they're using, or if you're a really active player and you play rotation positions like myself, then it's really helpful if on Vertigo B, if you're watching someone that plays there and you want to get active there, then it's good for you to know like the micros of like what is working for them in those positions. Or if you're, wanting to push like A on Anubis and, you're the mid player, you should definitely know like how A players are, aggroing it, and like how you can get involved in that area of the map. So I think that trying not to be limited to your positions helps a lot. And you're going to find a lot of cool ideas that you probably wouldn't have otherwise.
That's actually strikes a really interesting note for me, because I remember having a conversation with you 2 or 3 years ago over the phone, I think when I was at 100 Thieves, and I was just having a chat and talking about some like team dynamics and so on. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because At the time, it seemed like you were in a situation where, which happens, I imagine. So, I mean, it should in theory happen to everyone if they have a career long enough, where you're going to be joining different teams, and you may join a team where you have maybe a pretty strong sense of your identity and your role, which is how you perform best. You know that you perform best, but then you might be on a team where you got to kind of make it work. Maybe you're kind of stepping on someone else's toes because of the role differences, or maybe it's actually just even a different theoretical sort of stance on how the game should be played compared to maybe some of your teammates, and so there's maybe a clash there, which also creates a situation when you kind of have to depart from what you feel like is a style that you play that you feel like is optimized for you. And so you go through these processes, maybe even different roles entirely. So I'm sure that you've been in a lot of these different spots over the course of your career, but what makes the most sense to me is the perfect situation is if you get to play the role that's like where you're perfectly comfortable and you're leveraging all your strengths in the most possible ways. So how has that evolution been across your career? How has that helped you? How has that hindered you? What have been the lessons that you've learned from position to basically be in a position where you can be in the best spot when you're on any given team to be your best?
Well, I think for me, I haven't really done like a lot of role changes. I mean, I have like here and there on Liquid for certain spots. Here on FaZe, I'm also having a couple spots like here and there that I'm changing. But in general, I'm like able to play like the positions that I want. But throughout my career, like you're kind of saying, when you have these different dynamics within the team, the way that you play one position can be completely different on one team compared to another, just because of like you were saying, if like, someone comes in and they might be stepping on your toes or you're stepping on their toes, you're going to have to like adjust for that. Some team might play like a position way more aggressive than you on your team because of just either the philosophy or the way that they're setting up another player. So I think that there's always going to be like these little dynamics that change how you're playing your positions. And for me, what I think is really important is making sure that you're finding a style that is good for your game. Where, in the past, I think some of my biggest mistakes is like trying to play like a style that doesn't really work for me. And I think that if I was just more adamant back then about what I wanted, then I probably would have performed better in like those down periods. Because I think it's very important that you're not being like forced into a way that doesn't work for you. And I also think that it's a big thing from the leader of the team that they're understanding of that and they're trying to get the most out of their players where they can make it work. And coming into FaZe, we have like some role clashes. We have people that are changing their positions, and the way that he thinks, like Karrigan, the way that Karrigan thinks about making that work is, we're going to be playing different styles of these positions compared to, what people are typically used to, because we want to make sure that we can activate the players the best they can. Even if we're playing like a role that, is typically more passive, we want to make sure that, we can be flexible enough to put people in positions where they can shine and play their game.
And it seems like Karrigan may be one of the best people in the business in helping to create that based on the evidence, based on his history, the amount of international lineups that he's helped to produce great results with. So is Karrigan someone from afar you've admired or have been like, oh, I want to be like, what it would be like to play on a Karrigan team? Has that been a thing in your mind in the past?
Yeah, I've definitely thought about it before. I mean, Karrigan is the best IGL of all time. I think that is just like, a fact, I think. It just, at least right now, I think that's just a fact that he's like the best IGL of all time, like in CS. That's just my opinion. But he has always like had that aura, I would say, of making sure that the team is playing into their most comfortable positions, whether that's like through interviews or from just playing. I even remember I played like a pug with him in EU FPL. I don't even remember. It was like 2017 or 16 or something. And the way that he was like calling to like make me comfortable was like so apparent and just nice. Like it was just very, very nice. And coming into this team now is also, it just like reinforces everything that I thought, because I've had times where, I would be, telling like my IGL in the past, I'm like, I don't feel comfortable like in this position, or like the way that I'm playing, it doesn't feel good. Like even if I'm playing like the same position that I've always played, maybe the meta shifted and now I have to play a completely different style, and maybe this other position feels better from like the flow of the team, and I would feel better in that way. And I think it's always like a give and take of like, yeah, you have to be able to like learn to play different styles, but I think you always have to try to make sure that like your players are feeling comfortable. And immediately, like when I joined this team, that was like it's like the first thought that is like going through his head of like, I need to make sure that Rain is comfortable. I have to make sure EliGE is comfortable. I have to make sure that Frozen is comfortable. Brokey, like he's just thinking of like the best ways to set up his players and make sure that everyone is, playing at their best. And it's like a very stark contrast to a couple points in my career where I just like didn't feel like that same, that same thought process, I guess.
That's really cool as well that Karrigan's someone that really is going to do a lot with that information, because I can definitely, I've seen in the past, there can be players that aren't very communicative, and it might not be that they aren't necessarily inherently not communicative. It might be that they themselves don't know how they don't understand how something feels as much. They're not as in touch with sort of the emotional data that they're getting essentially, and they might just try to like say, okay, I can just like learn my way through this, as opposed to being able to be sort of that, have that emotional awareness and be like, okay, this feels off, this doesn't feel right, and they're in tune with that, and then they can kind of express that to the IGL in a way that's like it's like a relationship, but both parties always want more information, and that allows them to serve each other better. And so it's really interesting to see Karrigan in his career, because a small anecdote, there was this event, I think it was in 2018 or something, or 2019, where for whatever reason, I won't get into all the backstory, but Karrigan and I were alone in a hotel in some weird random place outside of Kiev in Ukraine, and it was just him and me, and I was like, yo, do you want to do a podcast? And he's like, yeah, sure, we don't really have anything else that we can do out here, so let's do it. And one of the many things that he told me was, because I was kind of asking him, like, what is the goal, like, what are you trying to create, what's your vision for your career? And he essentially said, I want to be the best in-game leader ever, and not just that, but I want to do it by making sort of the most different types of international lineups work. And it was at a time when the international lineups weren't like super proliferated, like really common, and it has since become very common. And what's amazing, and I've just so much respect for him, is that he followed through on that vision. He's still doing it right now. So it's super impressive. Immense respect. Just staying on Karrigan for a second, what are some other qualities? Because you said you think he's the best in-game leader in the business at the moment. What are some of the qualities that you think make him stand out, that more in-game leaders should be looking at or emulating in the Counter-Strike scene?
I think the first thing that people will probably notice is just his leadership qualities. It's just very apparent, just as a spectator, and I think that everything that you see on the screen is just true. Like, I think that he's just a great leader. He does a great job of keeping everyone in like a good mental space. He has like a lot of like tactics that he like employs. I like, it sounds kind of funny saying it like that, but he just like has a lot of like really good ways of making sure that people stay on track, or like we stay in a good headspace. I did an analysis of their comms from the Liquid video that he showed, and there was like a point where like Frozen, he like whiffed or something, and like Karrigan just immediately like refocuses him, and it's just like like he's trying to like get his mind going and trying to distract him from like what just happened. And he does this stuff like all the time, and I think that it's like such an awesome quality that he has, that he just does naturally. And it's from him just thinking of how he can get the best out of his players, like at all points. And that's why it just comes naturally, because that's like, it's just part of like what he is subconsciously thinking as a leader, of like how he can do that. So from the pure leadership aspect, I think that he's amazing. And from like the tactics standpoint, I mean, he's obviously has an amazing mind for the game. I think that he does a really good job of orchestrating the rounds in a very efficient manner. And his ideas are just like always flowing. Like, he always like feels like he has like a lot of really good ideas. And I think that tactic creation isn't like the hardest thing from when you're playing like outside of the game, because I think a lot of people can, make a lot of tactics, but he does a really good job of making stuff that's not on the book or something that's very similar, and just making it flow very naturally. And I've always thought that's like a good indicator of a good tactician whenever you're playing. It's something that I noticed even with Steel when I played with him back in like 2015, that when someone is like orchestrating around like really quickly at a spawn, and they're just doing everything on the fly, like how quickly can they do that, and how easily can they make the round make sense from like a macro perspective. And I've always like felt like when someone can do that very well without it all being like pre-planned, that's that's someone that's like really knows what they're doing and doing like a really good job at it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how difficult all of that is to actually do. So I mean,
yeah, it's actually really hard. Like, if you just try it, you're just playing pugs and you want to like make a round and you have a round in your head that you want to do. How quickly can you explain everyone's position of what they should be doing in that strat that you're trying to do and make sure that they understand it? And you have to do that all within 12 seconds. That's not easy at all. And if you see people do that, you should cherish that, because you definitely have a diamond there.
now, speaking of like figuring out the maps and everything. Obviously, we've had like an evolving map pool. In CS and very recent changes. Trains coming back. Vertigo's going out and so on. And for you, like, how much does it matter the map pool changing as a professional player? Are you of the mind that doesn't actually matter, I will just get good at whatever is in front of me because I can't control that? Or do you have strong opinions on the map pool?
No, I think it's the first thing that you said. I mean, I try not to think about things that I don't have really much control over. I mean, I'm playing this game, it's my job, and whatever sucks about a certain map, I mean, I can just abuse that, right? Like, that's why, we played Vertigo on Complexity and we were the best Vertigo team, for a reason. Like, it's a crap map, but like, if it's a crap map that we can be good at, now we're cooking with something, and it's going to help our map pool a lot. And it obviously helped us for that entire year.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting that you mentioned that because they're all like pro players or players in general. Like, just in my experience at least as well, just I see it all the time where they are actually really stubborn about map stuff, like stubborn about new maps and like almost like an emotional, I'm not going to bother playing that because it's garbage. It's like it's beneath me type of thing. But yeah, it's like it's so weird because I have seen people lose tournaments just because they're not willing to embrace new things in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like with weapons, right? With like the Karrigan, the AUG. Like, as soon as I just saw that it's obviously the best, I just only started using them. Like, it's just like whatever is going to be the best and going to help me win, then I'm going to do it. Like, I should have done that in StarCraft as well. I played Terran, and like I should have obviously just played Protoss. Like, I'm just like to Protosses, and it's so broken. I should have just played Protoss, and I should have just stopped crying,
Dude, that's so funny. Okay, hang on. So we talked about actually some people you've learned from in Counter-Strike, but what about like outside of Counter-Strike? Because obviously, you're someone that started out, like playing a lot more seriously in StarCraft, but and you've also interacted with a lot of like pro players. You've been on Liquid. I'm sure you must have had at some point a conversation with Rafa. So, who are some people that outside of CS that you've learned things from, or you've looked up to or admired?
Oof, that's a hard question, because honestly, I feel like I kind of like stay within my bubble. I'm kind of just I don't know. I'm kind of introverted, I would say. So I don't really go outside of my bubble too much if I if I can. So I think I've learned the most definitely from like the people inside of CS, and I think that I haven't really learned a lot from like conversations of other people like outside of CS, but I've learned a lot just from like watching them and like seeing like what they do, and seeing like what works for them, whether that's business leaders or military people or StarCraft players, whatever it is. I usually just learn from watching it, but the introverted side of me keeps me from having those conversations.
Yeah, I feel like that is one of those things where, with as a fan, and you might have the perspective that, like, because you're a fan of the team too, and it's almost like this like comic book strip thing where like all of these like awesome pro players from all the different teams are within that org are like having conversations, and but the reality is, like you say, it's not as often the case that anyone has necessarily the time or always to be able to do that. So you mentioned outside sources, like you started mentioning business leaders or military people. So I assume you've read books. I know obviously like you've read all of Tendler's work. So what are some other books you've read or sort of areas you've gone to that you found value from, that obviously is not necessarily directly one-to-one, even like a sports related thing, but you found value anyway?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think that Jared Tendler's books are definitely the number one thing that helped me the most, especially in 2018, 2017, like that point in my career, like really helped me a lot. Also the Jocko Willink series, read all of those, and that
So
also
good.
helped me a lot back then. Yeah, they were super good and really engaging. Also the Inner Game of Tennis, also a super good book that helped me focus more on visualization and how important that is. And then I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm also going to say not books, but animes. of like the sports
Mm.
animes, Blue Lock and Haikyuu are actually really, really good. And I think that Blue Lock is like actually helps me a lot this year of focusing on ego and how important ego is to actually being like the best possible player that you can be and like the positives of that. And I really like enjoyed all of that stuff, and I think that it's really helpful.
So I wanted to sort of double click on the ego thing there a little bit. So this is like a really interesting thing because I feel like from a sports psychology sense, okay, are we talking about confidence when it comes to ego, and maybe sort of how you draw that confident frame of mind, or how do you look at the term ego and how it interacts with you as a professional player?
Yeah, I would say it's essentially confidence, and it's kind of even like a delusional confidence that I think that is really important. That's like the important part of ego, where you have to think that you are like the guy, and it's good for egos to clash and for you to have like egos on the team of like everyone wants to be like the best player, because that's going to be enhancing everybody, and it's going to be making like these natural chemistries come out, because we're putting ourselves in extraordinary positions that you normally wouldn't, because everyone wants to shine. And when you have like all these players that are trying to shine their hardest, you're gonna have a lot of really cool situations that you otherwise wouldn't if people are going to stay confined inside their limits. You know what I mean? So kind of just having everyone striving to go past their limits, as I think the most important part of ego. And it's going to give you the confidence when you're playing like these other players that are also trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, dude, I really enjoyed the topic of confidence because it is something that's I feel like it's a sensitive issue with everyone, because everyone's experienced like losing your confidence, and everyone can kind of understand what that feels like to a degree. But it's kind of hard also to understand, like, if you ask someone to define it, it's a hard thing for a lot of people, I think, to define unless you've really, really looked at it a lot. And I think one of the breakthroughs I had personally with my interpretation with it was that it creates this like very strong mental frame where it allows me to just be myself in a way and not be intimidated by anything that's happening. So I'm never kind of going into more of a negative space where I'm starting to maybe be more risk averse or limit myself, but I always remain in a place where I can make the optimal decisions regardless as to what the actual situation is. And sometimes that means taking a really big risk, but because I don't have any sense of because that frame is giving me the confidence, I don't have any sense that risk is going to be bad. I just know it's the right play. So the risk itself doesn't affect me emotionally. That's kind of like how my interpretation of it has been. But it's also really hard. And I feel like it takes a lot of practice to really effectively deploy that. Because there are some people I think that take it too far and they become assholes. So like, so it can be a tricky one, but yeah, have you had a period in your career where you've like really struggled with confidence a lot? Is there like a moment that really strikes you?
Yeah, 100%. I think that the end of Liquid for like the last year on Liquid was pretty much my lowest point in confidence. I wasn't really tilting from like a angry perspective. It was more about me being down on myself, and that was something that I kind of had to build up. And I would have obviously done things differently now if I had the chance to tell my younger self what I could and should have done. And I think that speaking about like ego and what I've learned from watching Blue Lock, it is like an anime, but I think they have really good stuff in it of how to get your confidence back and what makes me me. And I think that's like a really big thing is you need to know what is good for you, what works for you. And when I joined Complexity, that's obviously like my rebuild period that I had, where I have to like rebuild myself and I have to win myself over for everybody and show that I still have it and I can still be a great player. And that was with the first thing that I pretty much got when I joined the team, especially from JT, of like I had ideas of what I think that I want to do, of like how I think that we should practice and stuff. And JT immediately was just like, well, this is what works for me. Like I'm the caller. I'm gonna I do best with this schedule. This is how I want to do things, and this is like how I practice the best. This is how like my brain is like working the best. And I'm just like, yeah, that makes sense, because like I wanted to practice more of like how we were playing on Liquid, and I also felt like we needed more practice time, because on Liquid we were doing like a really 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 long days of probably in total about like 4 hours of theory and 6 scrims. So I was like, okay, well on Cole, like we need to like get going on this right now because we were doing less than that. So I'm like, hey guys, let's try this. So we were trying the same type of schedule, essentially where we were playing from like 11 a.m. until 11 p.m. pretty much a lot of the days. We did that for like a week, and then JT pretty much said what I said before of like, dude, we can't do this. Like I'm not playing. I don't feel like I'm getting better playing like this. I don't think that like my individual has gotten any better since playing more like this. It just doesn't really work for me. And I really respected him that he said that. And of course, like I'm gonna be doing like whatever. And we immediately went back to like a practice schedule that works best for him and what is gonna help us like individually the most. And we immediately started seeing more progress. And I wish that I did the same thing on Liquid when I was feeling lower confidence, because I never felt like I was able to get back into what makes me me. And I really enjoy like having individual time. I don't like playing 6 7 scrims a day. It's super tiring, and it's not like you're able to actually practice a lot of like your individual mechanics anyway when you're scrimming. There's only so many gunfights that you're having, and those are just really long days too. Like I prefer being able to watch my own games, watch POVs. I like watching my scrims back and seeing like what went wrong or like how I could have peeked an angle better. But if you're having days where you're playing for 12 hours straight and you obviously got to sleep for 8 9 hours, there's just not enough time in the day. So that's something that I learned a lot. I really respected JT a lot, and I wish that I did the same thing that he did as well.
I think that's that's really insightful. I'd love to ask you about some of the things that, if you're comfortable sharing. You mentioned you're talking about strengths and just recognizing your strengths, and someone that has done as much internal work that you have done and how much you've played and so on. Like, what are some of those strengths for you? What does that look like specifically when it comes to you?
Well, I think that I have a really good workflow of how I want to employ different ideas. I think that when I'm watching other people play, I can really get into the zone with like me just watching their gameplay. And I think that's like what's the most important, is just making sure that you're just constantly in the zone as much as you can when you're playing and you want to play your best. And I think that I do a good job at that when I'm able to feel out these rounds and stay really like on top of things. Obviously think I'm good mechanically, so that helps. And when I'm able to stay on top of the meta and the macro of like how teams are playing, it helps me a lot in the game, because I know and I have more certainty of the calls that I'm making that they're going to work. And it just makes everything have like a better flow when you're playing the game and you have that certainty. Whether you're right or wrong, it doesn't really matter, honestly, at the end of the day. Like obviously you want to be more right than you are wrong, otherwise you're just making crap calls. But even if you're right 70% of the time and you're wrong 30% of the time, you can still win a lot of those 30% that you're wrong, because you're confidently doing stuff together and you're sure of your call, and you have to be okay with making those wrong calls, which is something that I got a lot more used to on Complexity. Because one of the things that I struggled with on Liquid is when I was having these games where I'm making these calls and I was feeling really bad, like if they were wrong, and it would make me want to like do them less because I felt bad about it, like if I got someone killed, for example. But on Complexity, I took more ownership of that. Like when I'm wrong, like I felt more okay with it because I took more ownership of it, and it gave me higher confidence in my calls. And everything just, I feel like it's just a combination of everything. I'm able to watch more, do my individual stuff that makes me me, feeling more ownership over my calls, where I'm okay with being wrong, and how I want to like go about that, like with my calls specifically. So if I am wrong, like I don't need to feel bad about being wrong, essentially.
It's I also love how you mentioned it. I mean, I love all of these topics because it dips into some of the like psychology, and just there's so many elements that interact, and it's just very interesting to me. And going back to the confidence point again, it's so interesting how like you're mentioning how you feel bad when you're making those wrong calls. And I feel like, that, like one of the things where if you are in a place where you've got that really confident frame of mind and you've got a lot more you get a lot more resiliency to the negative emotions. So you're able to like actually very easily or much more easily focus on, okay, what's the productive thing? And I know that this doesn't say anything about me as a person type of thing. It doesn't like hit your kind of self-worth as much. So you're able to just like power through. And then it's like it compounds positively. But if you're not confident, it compounds negatively because all the negative stuff like hurts you more. So it's like this horrible spiral that you can get stuck into.
Yeah, I would always just feel bad too if I like got someone killed. So if I made like a call like on Liquid, for example, and like it was wrong and I like messed up and they died, like I would feel super bad about it. And it would definitely like impact me. So I got more comfortable with that on Complexity because not only were they relying on my calls, but I had to do them. Like I had to be that guy that was doing them. So I had to be more okay with, if I made a wrong call and we ended up either losing the round or someone died because of it, I'm not gonna, beat myself up about it. And I'm just gonna be like, my bad. Like, let's like just different tactics of like, getting past it and not feeling bad about it where it would impact me later of, making those confident calls later. So I think it's just a really good, combination of everything, being able to work on like the individual. So I have confidence that my calls are right and that like I'm understanding the macro correctly, the way that we're going out and we're microing out these different positions, are good ways of doing it. So I think it's just like a really good combination that you have to have.
It's really cool too how much benefit it seems, or at least that there seems like there's so much benefit to having a strong team culture, and like the opposite is true as well, where I can imagine where there's a lot more negative risk if the pressure's on you to make calls and you've got a negative team culture where there's the people don't have your back as much, the chemistry is not as good, you don't have as much of an aligning like sense of identity or vision, like you're not as much of a like cohesive team. So that's got to be like very hard to deal with as well. And I feel like I've seen a lot of teams just fall apart just simply because the culture is too toxic, and it creates an environment where making mistakes, whenever there is pressure, it's just going to create way more fractures that are much more severe amongst the players. So yeah, you're just reminding me of how important also on top of all of this a team culture is, because individuals' confidence is going to waver over time, but you just want to make sure, I feel like, it doesn't ever get to like a critical point of threshold where it kind of breaks into a spot where someone like is almost in the slumping territory where they can't even ever find the confidence anymore.
100%, yeah. And if you've read my interviews when I joined Complexity, one of the things that I was saying a lot is I was thankful for the space to be able to fail like on the team. And that also goes along with like the calling stuff. So like if I make a call, then it's okay because, I'm taking responsibility for that. And they're okay, like if I'm going to be failing. That's just like a learning process. And like I said before, you obviously need to be making more right calls than wrong calls. But if you don't have like an environment that lets you do that, then, you're set up to fail, like you were saying. And I think that's indicative of a good leader and like having a good like coaching staff of making sure that you have like an environment that allows people the willingness to fail. And I think that's such an important thing. It can't even be understated, because if you have a really good player and he's, bogged down by, these types of thoughts, you're just not going to succeed. So, you want to put like your players like in as best position as possible. And especially like as a caller, like I can't even imagine like being an IGL where every single wrong call is being scrutinized. Everyone needs it to be able to play their best.
Yeah, it reminds me of like a common scenario in game 2 where you'll see, I think I remember seeing this as a caster a lot, where I had this period, I guess like still look at things like this way, especially when you're zoomed out, like a caster's perspective of the poker kind of, expected value plays type of thing, where you're looking at it and like, okay, this team made this like opening as the T side, and they got into these positions, like they got an afterplan or something like that, and it was really advantageous, but then they lost. Then they do it again, they get into the same spot, and then they just lose, and then they just stop doing it. And I'm like, but on paper you were absolutely getting into the better spots. And I wonder sometimes, is there a lack of recognition of the more kind of calculated expected value? Okay, we're all in like the best spots. It was just that the other team hit that 10% out and they managed to just win a couple times, but we should keep doing it. But it seems like that emotional element, it should also be respected to a certain extent, because you're not the only person, I guess, as the in-game leader making those calls. How do your teammates also feel about that situation? How do the percentages has changed there. Like, what is your interpretation actually of this kind of example?
It's pretty much the same concept of thinking in bets. There's a book that pretty much goes over that exact thing that I've read as well, which is, talking exactly like in poker, exactly what you're saying. And I definitely subscribe to that. I think I've even said that to you in one of our previous podcasts or talks, that you have to be thinking about it in percentages of, if you are making the high percentage play, then you need to just look at it from the decision making process and not from the result, because if you're looking at everything from, did it work or did it not work, then you're going to run out of ideas real quickly, because you can make that same good call twice, and under the same circumstances everything is the exact same, but the enemy did something that was unexpected and it ended up ruining the whole round. Or maybe everything was completely perfect, but you just whiffed, or like somebody whiffed, or they weren't focused and they got pushed, but everyone's like in position for that doesn't make it a bad call. It just means stuff happens, and you have to look everything through the lens of, did I make the right decision, and how can I analyze my decision making? Was it actually the high percentage play, or was it not the high percentage play? So you have to think of it more like in the bets of what you think is the high percentage play, and try not to be too result oriented about things. Otherwise, yeah, your scrapbook's going to be really, really small really quickly.
Yeah, this is all music to my ears, man. I talk to people about this stuff a lot. I think that was, I think, in my, when I was really studying poker a lot, that was some of the biggest takeaways I had. That I was like, it blew my mind how important that was. And one of the things that I've been trying to help some people with recently is this like sense of that they reminded me of kind of rewiring your programming a little bit, so that you're rewiring your reward systems, because the default reward systems usually feel like outcome oriented, because it's like, oh, you get a kill or you win a round, like these are all outcomes, and you get the dopamine spike and all that. And that's like how the game is programmed. Actually, the game is like programmed in essentially the wrong way for you, because if you want to succeed as a competitor, you have to be more process oriented, and you have to, and also Human has a great episode about like the dopaminergic system, and how essentially if you're trying to, let's say, go on runs frequently because you want to improve your health, and to get yourself to do it, you're going to give yourself a reward after you complete the run, and that's way less impactful than if you just don't have a reward and you actually find a way to make the process the reward. Then you'll have a much more a higher level of consistency, and you'll actually find that you'll get much more fulfillment and enjoyment. And the interesting thing is that if you're just working for the reward too, that seems to have a much more negative potential impact on your sense of self too, because you're more likely to fail, and then that's a huge problem. So I like it. If you're not outcome oriented, you've kind of never failed, so long as you always do the process, which is what you said, which is what you kind of look at your decision. It's like, okay, how do I feel about the decision? So yeah, creating more points of success than failure too. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff there.
Yeah, exactly.
I could nerd out about this for a very long time. There's a couple more like because. Okay, so guys, originally I wanted to like kind of maybe like find a way to break this up into topical stuff and then sort of performance stuff, but we're weaving between them, which is totally cool. So I'm going to go back a little bit to some of the other topical stuff that I think people will really want to know your opinions of. So we mentioned the map pool, but we didn't sort of, and obviously you're cool with anything as we discuss, but what's your feeling about Train coming back? Are you excited to get Train back? What do you think of the Train in its current iteration? Is it kind of a shit map like you were kind of describing Vertigo, or do you feel like, is it too early to tell?
I'm honestly not like excited for it or not excited for it, because to me it doesn't really matter. I don't think that it's the same map obviously as it was before, so to me there's no nostalgia about it at all. Like I don't feel like anything when I see the Train of like, oh, I had like a cool play like I did before, because to me the map looks like it's going to be playing completely differently as it did before. I mean, I've watched some of the games, but I just don't have like any feelings towards it, because at the end of the day, like I'm gonna like whatever maps that we're playing well on. I'm gonna probably dislike the maps more that we're playing poorly on. And if we end up playing Train on FaZe here, then if we're good at it, then I'm going to like it. It's the same thing as like with Vertigo and Complexity. Like I'm not going to hate the map because it's bad. Like I'll say in interviews, yeah, I don't think it looks good, like from a layout perspective, but I like it because we're winning on it. So like to me, that's what's most important. So if we're winning on it, then I'm happy with it. And it's too early for me to tell about the layout. because I think those are actually like hard questions to answer. I remember I was talking to Volcano about Split at one point in Valorant, very, very early on about Split. And I was like telling him why I thought it was a bad map. And he was like, well, why is it bad? And like I would try to like go into the details of, it doesn't have like good map control points, like if you compare it to like Mirage, when you take like control of connector and ladder, for example. And he's like, well, what about like X map? That doesn't have that same type of feel. And then like, yeah, you could go like so many routes of how can you analyze like what makes a map good and what makes a map bad. Like something being different doesn't make it bad, and there can be like other cool qualities to it that can make it good. So I think that it's like too early to tell, and I really don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really I think that's definitely a good response from Volcano, thinking about it, because it does make sense in the way that at least it depends on your theory, I guess, your philosophy of how the map pool should look. But I always appreciated as a player, I guess, almost somewhat through necessity, because maps are going to be different and some will be worse than others in theory. But that I always looked at it as like, okay, different maps emphasize different skill sets, and sometimes those skill sets, maybe it's stuff that you don't like it's more gambly, or maybe it's stuff that's like Dust 2, where it actually emphasizes, okay, there's more potential variance, you could say, in some respects, because of the openness and just aim duel nature of the map. So it's emphasizing more of the mechanics than it is maybe emphasizing more of the leveraging more of the strategy or tactics as much. So there's always going to be those different focuses. So that's kind of how I've always explained it away to myself.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And it doesn't make something like bad or worse. Like I think that you can definitely, if something is really bad, I think that we'd have a lot of good reasons. But I think that you have to look at it from like a game developer point of view. And that's pretty much what Volcano's questions were. It's like just asking a lot of questions, and it's you see that the answer isn't always so simple of like how to fix something or why something could be good or bad, because it can all be like opinion based at the end of the day.
Yeah, hopefully it is something where at the very least, there's, I guess, the only hope I have is that there's not many changes that have to be made, because that's obviously very disruptive and it can be like really annoying for you guys if there's like patches to maps, because if we're in season, it's going to come at an unfortunate time for somebody. You can't really stop that.
Yeah, that's what sucked about Vertigo, is like when we started playing Vertigo when it came out, the map like completely changed like multiple times, and it changed the dynamic a lot. And I think that's also why Valve, they're just like, well, let's just get rid of the map, because they tried so many different things to like make it more enjoyable from like a community perspective. And I think the biggest tell is always just like, are people wanting to play the map or are they not wanting to play the map? I think that's always just like the best decider, is like let the community decide. If they don't like the map, they're not going to want to play it. So I think that's what they do. They just check like how much this is being picked, how much it's not being picked, how much people are playing it in pugs and matchmaking, and how much they're not. So I think we'll see over time. I think like my initial impressions is I think that there's like a lot of opportunity for new things to happen. And until I play it a lot, I think it's hard for me to say.
Yeah, there's also, I think, another element. I think that maybe I guess maybe this is where the perspective of the pro versus the perspective of the fan can differ. But I think for the pros as well, you get so many iterations of meta that happen over time. That in of itself, even if it's a bad map, the constant change of here is the optimal play right now because this effectively counters the previous optimal play, and the cycle of that can actually be kind of interesting and like kind of in a similar way as you described when you were learning from other pro players, where it's this one-upmanship of, okay, we're seeing that we do similar things, but you're doing it in like slightly better. How can I add another 1% improvement to that? And I think that's pretty satisfying at the pro level, but for the fans, it's hard to see the difference there.
Yeah, I think that's stuff it's never going to be easy for a fan to see unless you play like at a high level, or it can be explained, whether it's from like analysts or people that are content creators that are like displaying that stuff. And that's why I think at the end of the day, it's based off of enjoyment from people playing the map, or it's enjoyment from watching. So I think that it's pretty much just those things. That's the most important thing about games, is like, is it fun to watch? Is it fun to play? And if both of those are yes, then it's good. And that's also why I think Vertigo just didn't hit the mark as well for a lot of people. Whereas like, if you just look at it from that lens of like, are people liking to play this? Do people like watching this? And I think that both of those answers were no across like a higher percentage of the player base. And that's why we get rid of the map and we deem it as bad. And I would honestly agree with that. Like, if something is fun, that's the most important thing. Is it fun to watch, fun to play?
Well, just switching gears very slightly. Again, you've got a pretty long career at this point, 10 years, and it's so cool because it feels like there's so much left for you, and you're still finding a lot of new ways to push the envelope and sort of create changes and improve. And so it feels like you have a very alive career in so many senses. It's not stagnating by any means. What have you noticed over the last what have you noticed for, let's say, the current generation of competition as it differs maybe to competition 3-4 years ago and maybe 3-4 years ago from that point? Like how has that evolution sort of been from your eyes?
Oof, that's a hard question just because I think you can go so many routes with this. But I would say the biggest is how easy it is for you to get good these days. And I think that's just anything in the world right now. It's just so easy. There's just so many resources that like if you just look at them, it's just asking for you to grab out, for you to take it and just try to do whatever you want to do. Like you could literally do anything right now. And for players like that are coming up, there's so many things that you could be watching that could help you become a better player. There's so many like training tools out there that we just didn't have back in the day, or maybe we had them but they were just not as good. The content creators that we have that are like explaining things and that are teaching you things, I don't know. I feel like there's just so much, and it makes me like so optimistic, honestly, just about life, that you can just learn anything right now. Anything that you put your mind to, you can do it right now. And I'd say 95% of it, maybe even higher, is free. So you can do anything that you want right now, and it's all free. Like that's just awesome. That's just sick. Like you can learn and do anything. And when you're looking at it from like a CS perspective, like look at how much stuff that we have. Like we have aim trainers if you want to go that route. We have refrag if you want to go that route. We have all the 2D demo viewers that you want. You have like Skybox that like people use for like analytical tools, and also as the 2D demo viewer. You have like POV channels that are just like on the daily, like uploading the best players, POVs in the world. Like you don't even have to go download the demo if you don't want to. And you have like pro players that are explaining like their thought process, like I do on my channel, like James does, like Stico does, just showing you everything that you can possibly want to know about the game. Like I don't know. I just think that it's the amount of content and stuff that you have to improve. It's all there for the taking, and it's sick.
It's funny because I wonder if some players might be a bit more intimidated than you about that, because you work really hard to get where you are, and what you're basically saying is my job is at the most risk that it's ever been, essentially, because there's so many opportunities for new donks to come around, and maybe someone that's going to be better than donk. I mean, each time we get a new generational talent like that, of course they are better than the last one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always I like always referencing Cars. I don't remember which Cars it is, but if you've watched Cars, there's like the one where Lightning McQueen, he's like being like the old guy, and like there's all this like new tech, and like these cars are like training with VR and stuff to have the best routes and train the best and all that stuff like that. That's why as we've talked about as well in the past, is I'm always looking for like the next thing of like what can I be doing better. What's like the more efficient way that I could be doing this? And I take that from every player that I come across. Like if there's something that's like obviously better, and like this guy is practicing this way, and he's way better than me right now, then I'm gonna employ whatever that works. Like as long as it works for me, I'm gonna be doing that. And that's how you stay on top of things, especially when you're becoming like an older player. I don't like to use that word, but once you've been playing for a longer time compared to being a rookie, then you have to stay on top of these things because I think that that's how you get left behind for sure.
Yeah, that is funny actually, because it is so funny, because when I think of you, I have my first image when I ever saw you in person was at the Face It LAN in London, and it was like 2015 or something, and you were very young. You were like 16 maybe, something like that. You were super 17, young. 17. Yeah. So you're very young, and that's like whenever I think of you, I like, that's actually one of the cool things being around a while myself, is having like seen from the beginning some people's careers. It's just kind of cool to see different stages of it from the outside. But Speaking, so talking about that mentality and just like how easy it is to learn and get good and everything. One of the other sort of more topical points I wanted to touch on and get your view on was we've seen interesting things happen in certain regions. So early in the conversation, you mentioned how Europe has the strongest pool of talent in terms of like competition and tryhards, and just like a very good quality of practice and pugging. However, some regions have been great, like Sweden, historically amazing region, but then and obviously created a legacy of so many Counter-Strike greats, but then has been suffering now for a long time. And more recently, I think very surprisingly for many, like the Danish Counter-Strike scene seems to be struggling more as well. It seems like they're trending as opposed to up as they always were, but now they're trending kind of down in terms of the amount of talent that's able to like be at that top level compared to what we're used to. What is your sense of the rise and fall of these like great Counter-Strike nations, or even just regions like North America that have seemingly sort of been stuck for some time?
That's really tough. I think that honestly, I have no idea from like the other countries and regions, because I honestly just have no idea. I think that it'll probably be a little bit different for everybody, but at least like thinking from like the NA point of view of like, why have we not been able to have like a more consistent set of teams that can be the best? And I think part of it is one, player base, at least for us. So maybe like the player bases of those regions are potentially dwindling. It's hard to say. We obviously lost like a lot of players that could have been stars go to Valorant, or maybe if someone is going to be a potential star, if they're making the choice between CS and Valorant, maybe they're just going to be like, okay, well, let's just do Valorant. And I always just kind of think of it as a numbers game. Same thing with like women's CS, or why the CIS region is better. I think they just have way more players. Like I would love to just see a graph of how many people are playing the game in these countries, because I would honestly probably put more of my weighting towards Sweden just having less players than they used to. I don't know. Maybe they're just doing different stuff, right? Like it could be the same thing. I don't know if it's necessarily Valorant, or maybe people just aren't playing as much. But I feel like if we somehow got these stats from FaceIt and just see purely from numbers how many people are playing in each region, I think that we'll pretty much have that answer. Because if you have like 1 million people that are from Russia playing the game, and you have 1,000 people playing from NA, then the chances that we have a superstar like in those 1,000 is way lower compared to if you have 1 million. So that's just like obvious, like from the numbers, and that's what I think. I think it might just be like a numbers thing, and then it's just a question of why are the numbers going down based off of like the region and all like the factors that go into that.
All right. Well, hopefully, maybe one of the people of the internet who's listening to this can drop those graphs to you and like tweet them your way, and we get those.
It'd be interesting, right?
Yeah,
that's what I think it is. Because I don't know. I always think it's a lot more simpler than it is, and I think it just might be a numbers thing.
Yeah, it could very well be. I'm also really interested just to find out. I haven't really seen a discussion like I've seen lots of articles on various topics, not really usually about gaming, but where enormous amounts of data and graphs and various things are used to help to explain or break down these more complex phenomena. Because when you do look at the data, it can actually be quite simple, like you say, but it's easy to make it feel complicated when you just don't have any data to orient yourself.
We would just be grasping at straws, right? We would just be like, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But I think it's really hard to know that stuff. We would have to go into why do we think like the current, for example, Danish players aren't playing as good as they used to in the past. And then it would be like a completely different, topic. We would have to really go into the talk about it of like how and why that's happening, and we have to do that for like each region, for like Sweden, Denmark, NA, and we'll have different reasons for all of them, I think. But if you literally just had more players, then I think that we would find the players regardless.
Yeah, and that it does actually feel like an entire sort of podcast roundtable type of topic by itself, because there's so many factors you'd maybe want to look at to kind of maybe eliminate or add to the context, but exactly. Talking now more about some more of the performance stuff. Again, for me, the first interview I did with you back in at the Berlin Major, 2019 or whenever that was, 2018, 2019, So one of those.
Yeah.
A long time ago, too long ago. You explained to me, because we started to talk about performance, and you explained the ABC game, and I was like, oh, this is like a very interesting concept. I have not heard of this before. And then that started me down the rabbit hole of Jared Tendler and just all of these various processes and approaches and ways to think about performance. So Jared Tendler has been someone that's been pretty impactful in your career. You've mentioned this multiple times. People can go back and listen to that podcast to find out some of those initial revelations around the ABC game in particular. It seemed like that was one of the major takeaways that you integrated into your game that helped you. But then it seemed like, after a time, you stopped working with him for a while. And then from my understanding, you went back to working with him, but was it more centered around helping you in managing to manage team dynamics as opposed to your individual performance? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that Jared has a really good way of getting to the root of issues. And, from reading his books, you'll just immediately see that. I mean, one of them is more focused on, your A game and focusing on how you can be the best player that you can possibly be. And for me, I feel like I've already found the formula that works for me, as we've talked about earlier. But the like managing tilt and issues that you have like within a team, those are always going to be changing, and they're always going to be a little bit different. And what's important is finding like the root of why you're feeling that way and how we can solve it. And he does a really good job at finding that answer whenever like I was having problems. So Jared was always super, super helpful with that.
And when it comes to anything new, well, firstly, are you working with him right now? Because obviously the time span of like, I imagine you haven't been working with him consistently over the last 6 to 8 years. So it sounds like you're kind of bringing him in when you feel more of a need in one way or another. Have you currently been working with him, or did you kind of reach a place where you're kind of like, I'm kind of in a good spot right now, so we don't need to actively work together?
Yeah, it's pretty much what you just said. Yeah, like I don't think that I am constantly needing the help. I think it's more of like when I do need the help and when I'm having like a tough time and I'm not able to solve the issues on my own. Because I think what's important is when you're being coached by somebody, because that's essentially, he's a sports psychologist, but he's coaching you like from the mental side. And when you have like a mental coach like that, hopefully you're learning stuff of that and you can like solve the issues on your own. Even like with aim trainers, when I'm like working with Maddie and the amped guys, it's important that you're leaving your client at the end of your coaching sessions that they can self-assess and they can figure things out on their own, and you don't always have to go to the sensei of every single time you have an issue, that you have to go to your sensei to have them figure it out for you. So a lot of the times, like when I have issues now, I just try to think about like the same process that Jared would have from the mental side, and I try to figure it out for myself. And I think that it's nice that I do have like that support network that I can go to if I do need the help. Like if I do need to talk to somebody, I have people. I have like my coach, my IGL, my girlfriend as well. So what's really important is like having that learning process, like from your coach, like whatever it is in anything, I'd say that you're learning from that and you're not relying on them, teach a man to fish type saying, even for like the mental side. And I think that's why like, I don't have like a necessity for him, but I can always go to him if I need that. And I have worked with him, I believe at the beginning of Complexity for a couple months. I was paying for him on my own. And once I pretty much got to a good place, I was pretty much good, because, if I'm having like weekly meetings, I'm like, yeah, pretty much everything's going good. Same stuff as before, but it's going good so far. I don't need to have those meetings where we're doing like those weekly checkups. So for me, it's more of when I need it as a necessity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Has there been any other sports psychologists or other, any other resources in that department that have been helpful for you outside of Tendler's work?
Well, I've heard like things like here and there from other sports psychologists that it was definitely really interesting, but I think it's hard for me to say since I haven't like worked with them super closely. But I've definitely taken a lot of concepts from other sports psychologists that have had really cool things to say. But I think that in terms of like getting to the nitty gritty of the work, I think Jared has definitely been like the most helpful.
Awesome. Well, in terms of other not sports psychologists per se, but like other players. And I'd imagine that there's definitely some, wisdom or insight that maybe over the years you've drawn from other people around you in some of the teams. Has there been any moments like that? Any takeaways or learnings in that department from teammates or team resources?
Well, I would say just immediately the one that I said earlier about JT. I think that just like him having that certainty of like what works for him and like what works best for like his calling and everything like that, like how we're going to work the best as a team, like knowing what's really important for yourself to succeed, I think was my biggest takeaway from like what he said then. And it immediately just like clicked of like, yeah, that's what I should have done when I was feeling like bored, not bored, bad, and like in the dumps, like from like a mental perspective. At the end of my time on Liquid, I wish that I had that same mentality that he did. And I think that was the most like aha moment that I've had recently from like another player. And I'm sure I've had like other things, throughout the years. Probably not as on like the positive side as that, as you learn a lot of things from things going wrong, but from like the top side of the game, I think that was the most impactful, especially in the most recent years.
well, some of the is there like a big what not to do? That's like
pretty much a lot of the other things that is what not to do type stuff.
That's fun. Yeah, it's interesting because so much of this is about awareness, and it keeps coming back to me. This a lot of these ideas that you talk about. I don't know if it's like just something that's like just in my mind a lot lately, but just how it really does. There is this sense of helplessness when you get into the negative frame or the negative emotions. You start to feel naturally more helpless, and therefore you feel like you actually can't solve your own problems effectively, and that's a super dangerous place to be. So that also probably shuts down your awareness, which from what you were talking about JT's process, JT was able to like stop. He's like, okay, this doesn't feel good, instead of allowing, like, I'm going to use that as feedback for me to then change the process, but I'm not going to like dwell in it and ruminate in it and get down on myself. I'm not feeling like this is reflecting on who I am. I'm just feeling like this sucks right now, so let's change it. That's like to me like a difference that stands out, and something that in my own life I've had to like find the moments when I'm like, oh, am I just like being helpless right now, or am I kind of hindering myself from being able to solve my own problems right now? And because that's sometimes it really feels like you can't solve your own problems. And I know with some players, I've noticed stagnating players will sometimes they'll pick the comfortable way that they think they can solve the problem. So like maybe the easiest example is I will just grind more death matches and just put more time into my mechanics, or like just play more hours. It's like an easy way that someone could think they're solving the problem without actually having to like look at themselves and say and have the awareness to say, oh, well, there's a deeper problem here, or I'm not willing actually to do the thing that I need to do to solve the problem. And so they're trying to evade it. So psychology is crazy, man.
Yeah, for sure. Another cool thing that you reminded me of is Jeff Bezos talking about stress. I don't know if you've probably seen the clip, but he's pretty much just saying like whenever he's stressed about something, it's because he usually has something, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that he's not addressing. And as soon as you get to addressing that, then some of like the anxiety and stress goes away, because I mean, everyone does it, right? I mean, I do it all the time of, there's things that like get stacked up on your plate, and it feels like a mountain of things that you have to deal with, especially, with how much like we have to travel and stuff. It just happens just naturally where things will pile up, and it gets very stressful of, how do I even attack this? And the first thing is just doing it. Like if you're stressing about something or you're anxious about something that you haven't addressed, then just getting to it and dealing with it in some way, even if it's just starting the process of, there's like an email that you haven't like responded to, be like, hey, I'm going to get to this. Like as long as you've started like the process of that, and you obviously do it eventually, and you don't just like leave it at that, then it's going to alleviate some stress, because you're starting to deal with like the issues that you're subconsciously or consciously thinking about.
Yeah, and this also brings me to like another point, which I think is also I found to be really important, especially in North America, maybe more so than other areas of the world, where I think in North America there's often a tendency to, when you've experienced like the negative stuff, to kind of almost diagnose yourself and say, oh, this is because I'm just I have like a disorder almost, or I should like take a pill or something like that, which would not to obviously in any ways say that that's not applicable in certain circumstances. But I think it's very easy to leap to this idea that you're going to integrate the difficulty with your identity, as opposed to trying to find ways to solve the problems by either changing how you think about something or changing the behaviors that you have, or just changing something. Instead, people are so resistant to changing something because it requires a lot of effort. It's really hard to do that. And I think that's something that stands out to me again in your career, that I think this segues nicely into some of these other topics where you embraced aim training, and aim training is something that is not fun for a lot of people. It's something that in theory for a lot of people seems to make sense, but at the same time, in Counter-Strike you actually have a lot of really good in-game tools, unlike other games like where aim training is more popular. Like Valorant is really popular in Valorant for a variety of reasons, but one of them is because there's not really many good training tools inside the game. CS has that, but you still like looked at aim training and you seem to come to the conclusion, hey, there's some value here. I imagine at the start you probably weren't sure where the value was exactly, but you went and did the work to find out. And it sounds like you were okay with coming away from that, being like, yeah, I overturned all these stones and there wasn't any value. Cool, I'm going to move on to the next thing. But you got there and you found the value from it. So with aim training, what was your kind of thought process? Because there's in Counter-Strike a lot of people that doubt it, and I'm sure that you probably had some skepticism at the start too.
Honestly, I kind of went into it with a really open mind, and what I always do is try to make sure that I have respect for the people that are at the top of their fields, because there's always something that you can learn from them, no matter what it is, whatever you think it is. And for aim trainers, I just saw how good the guys that were at the top were. And, this is obviously super related to my fields. Like if I was thinking about something super unrelated, like I don't know, I'm just gonna say like I don't know, knitting, I don't know, the best knitters in the world, like that's I would take like the concepts that they have of like how are they getting to the best and stuff like that, but it's nothing like practical for me. It's more of like a mental thing of like how are they doing it. But if I'm thinking about aim trainers, this is obviously something that's super related, because I you have to aim in Counter-Strike. So this is something that could be really, really useful for me. And I just had a lot of respect for seeing like how good they were at all of these different aspects of aiming. And I'm going to take whatever they have to say with a lot more respect, because I know how difficult it is. Like I tried playing like the same tasks and I'm like, geez, like I'm nowhere close to where they were, even giving it my all. So I'm going to use some of the tactics that they employ. I'm going to do like some of the training that they do. And that's how I kind of like went down the rabbit hole of like aim training. It's just a respect for how good somebody else is at their craft and seeing what you can take from that.
Yeah, mastery is a lot of transcendent qualities to it between disciplines. It's actually really rewarding if you start doing that process and you start to see like how much is related. It's a lot more, I think, than people might think.
Yeah, for sure. And you get to see like what people focus on. I think another thing that I didn't mention before when you're asking me like what I learned a lot from other players is I learned from Yakindar how important it is to focus on micro. And I never, like I would always do that stuff just subconsciously of like how I want to take duels. But after he started like talking to me about like how he thinks about his strafes, because he was like one of the best entries in the world back then. And when you try to break down like what is the best way to peak this angle? Like what is the best way for you to do like a strafe in this situation? Like when would you want to do like a short strafe, a long strafe? Like how far should you strafe? Like all of these things, like those are just more questions. And that's something was really, really impactful for me in CS. And it also relates to aim training here of when you really break down like how you're aiming, you're able to get much better at it, because you're now conscious of how many things that you didn't know before. It's like the what is it, the Dunning-Kruger effect before, of like how when you get exposed to more of this stuff, especially from other players that are really good at their craft, you're like, wow, I actually didn't know. I didn't know that it could be that granular, and you realize how much more that you could learn and improve from things.
Yeah, and you went through you did coaching with Matty, and I did a video actually kind of breaking down the report that he released with you, which is already awesome. That actually that I'm sure that you had to agree to. I'm sure that he asked you to agree before you released that. So it's really awesome that you both just were transparent with that process, so people could really see how granular it actually is. Because this is the thing: a lot of people were like, "Oh yeah, okay, well I'll give it to you. Aim trainers can be useful, but it's not useful for pros because they're already so good." And it's really interesting, like you said, how unbelievably good the aim trainer players are at aiming. And a lot of people say, oh well, yeah, it's not aiming in the game. And yeah, obviously yes, that's true, but it's like you got to be able to differentiate here, and not just kind of like just lump it in wholesale and say, okay, well, it's not in the game, therefore it's not useful. Yes, they're just very good at those specific skills, and there's so many other areas of life that are like this, where you, and this is how we improve. This is like what a PhD is. A PhD is, I don't know if people have seen that image where they describe like a PhD as like this circle of knowledge, of humanity's knowledge, and a PhD is like this tiny little bump on the outside of the circle, where it's like a minuscule, it's like tiny point, but it has expanded the circle. Whereas it's not knowledge that will fall inside of what is already known. These guys are experts at a niche to a degree that they're able to push the knowledge beyond anyone's previous understanding, and that's what they're doing. So I'm glad that you saw that too. What was it like, by the way, working with Matty? What was that like?
I think it was exactly kind of what I expected, of just someone that was just so knowledgeable about like his craft that he was able to like break down things a lot more than I expected. And he did a really good job of teaching me those things and making it very digestible of how I should be working on different concepts that he was talking about with me. How I can be employing it in like my training routine. So those were all like kind of things that we were going through, and you could see it in the document too of like what we were exactly working on. But he obviously showed like a super high level of expertise, which is exactly what I expected. So, just someone that is like the very best, because I mean, I considered Matty to be like the very best. How much you can learn from them if you're just open to it, and how much you can get out of it. So yeah, it was super helpful.
Speaking of stuff that's not super helpful, what have been some like avenues you've looked at for performance where you're like, okay, I'll give this a go, and you found out, okay, maybe this wasn't helpful. Is there anything like that that stands out?
I would say, well, at least for me, for pugging like in NA, like that wasn't really helpful like at all, because I've obviously, like we kind of already talked about it with like EU versus NA pugging, but I've realized for me that it's not the most helpful to be playing that stuff in NA at least. I've also really not liked KZing and surfing. I realized that doesn't really help you at all for movement, because there's a really big difference for gameplay movement versus just actual movement when you're trying to make like long jumps or B hops, and surfing I think just has no correlation at all. So I think that stuff is all fun, and I think that there's like a very small areas where it is useful, but at points I was spending more time on it, thinking that this is helping me in the game, and I'm like, yeah, there's some avenues like where I'm gonna feel like I have better movement here. And then I think like the aha moment, whereas like when I was watching Twists, he was like in a situation on Mirage at A site when he was anchoring on Liquid, and he was going around this box, and the way that he was like taking the angles and the duels, I was like, damn, his game movement, like his fighting move, I don't even know how to describe it because we don't have a term for it, but like his fighting movement is great here, and it has nothing to do with KZ. So as soon as that I saw that, I pretty much just like clicked. I'm like, yeah, KZ is just for fun. Surfing is like just for fun. So I'd say that those three, and that might be controversial. I think people won't like me for saying that, but I don't think it has that much of an impact on the real game.
Yeah, I think well, one of the things that's really interesting. One of the reasons why it's interesting to talk to you as well is because you do have such an appreciation for the granularity of these things, and like, okay, well, what works, what doesn't work, what's efficient, what's not efficient, how can I make it more efficient, these types of things. And when you're talking about the JT thing earlier, I did this podcast a while ago with actually, I don't know if you would have spoken to him, but he was one of the founders of the Get Amped program. His name's Metadoc. So he's like actually a doctor. And do you speak with him?
Hmm.
Okay, yeah. So I was talking with Metadog. We did a podcast about learning essentially, and there's many points that he made about this, but there was something that I sort of intuitively understood as a pro player a long time ago, but he was able to explain it more thoroughly with the science, the evidence behind learning. And one of the many things he talked about was like the optimal play time, and just for obviously every individual has their own physiological differences. So we all have like different gas tanks and different abilities to focus, and then obviously you can augment that to some extent with your sleep and your hydration, all the rest of these things. But ultimately, we're all a bit different. So you should try to figure out what that individual optimal play time looks like, because that's the amount of time that you can actually focus. So that's going to be the biggest bang for your buck in the time that you spend in the game trying to learn or apply new things that you want to learn to get the most out of those. And then what are the other things you can do on top of that? Like whether it's like taking a break at the right time. What is the right time? Do you do like non-sleep deep rest? Do you take a nap? Do you go for a walk? There are things in the literature that exist that help us to understand things that are much more efficient. And I actually do think there's lots of areas in esports where these things aren't really optimized. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the fact that it's hard to get players buy-in on a lot of stuff because and my theory has just been because unlike in traditional sports where you'll be like you'll go through sports programs like from a very young age, your whole life, experiencing being in systems, being coached, having those authority figures. But for most pro players, they get to where they are just having done what they've done. And so I think there's more resistance to changing things and so on. So I feel like there's a lot of areas still to improve on. Is that how you feel about it too?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that that's always been one of the main things that I try to do is being open to anything, whether that's like someone from like a different craft that thinks that they can help with different areas. I think that there's always things that we can improve on, and even if you every time that you look back like 3 years, I'd say in CS, you could see like, wow, there was like a big difference in like gameplay because, obviously we're building on things that we learn. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, as we always like to say. And that's all you need to know really, to know that there's always new limits to be pushed and there's more things that you could be doing, especially when you see all the things that work in sports and all the sports science of things of how they optimize their lives. And we're not even doing even a fraction of that still probably. And do we know if it is best for us? I don't know. We don't know yet, right? Because like we haven't really seen someone really go into that and have any studies on it. So I think that there's so many potential avenues for improvement that we can always keep going to. And every single year, I feel like I'm getting exposed to more and more of those concepts.
Yes, I can't wait to really see the evolutions that are left to be made in esports. I'm really excited for it, and I think hopefully there'll be a lot more players like you. This is one of the reasons why I still want to do the GM work, because I think there's so much good to be done on that side in terms of the systems and helping to like level up all these areas. But that aside, it still does come down to things like the capacity for discipline in the player. And discipline is really necessary to essentially execute on pretty much all of the stuff that you've talked about, because a lot of the stuff you've talked about are edges that you've looked to or gained, whether it's just reading books. I think like reading books is like something that is super valuable, and it sounds kind of like everyone knows that it's like kind of like valuable, but at the same time, like so few people are prepared to do it. And same thing with like just engaging with sports psychologists. There are lots of players that will like maybe like engage with them, but are they really open to them? Because it requires you to do what. It's not just that you go to this person and they fix you. You have to do the work afterwards, after the fact. And then similarly, like aim training, again, you don't necessarily know, like you said, you have to be able to self-teach too to get the true value. So even if you go and see the guy, he gives you the routines and he gives you the feedback, he gives you the data, you still have to coach yourself and do the work yourself after. All that requires discipline, and that's hard because this stuff it's not easy, and it feels like, especially if the value of you improving as a player, it might come a month or two later, like the delayed gratification. It's really hard, and that is all discipline. So how do you, with all that build up, how do you look at the idea of discipline? How do you keep yourself consistent in going after these edges and doing the hard work?
Well, I would say most of the days, like I feel more complete when I get these things done. So it's for me, the process like feels good for me to like complete. And I also try to make sure that I don't go overboard. I think that I have like a really good knowledge of myself and like my body and my mind of what I think is enough for me like in a day. Because I think that you have to be careful not to burn yourself out, especially when you've been doing this as long as I have. You see players that they shine bright for 2 to 3 years, and then they fall down like after that, because I think that it's very difficult. Like everything is very hard. It gets tiring. You can't really be putting 100% in every single day for 10 years. It's just there's just too much that you will just feel overwhelmed with. And I think that I have a good balance of that, of work life balance, of how much that I can do individually before it like tires me out. But for me, I don't know, I just like the process of getting things done and feeling like I accomplished what I wanted to. Every single day, like I feel really motivated, honestly, because I feel like I don't burn myself out. I have like highs and lows of that, of like where I feel more and less, but I feel like I always am consistent with what I want, and I getting and just like sticking to my process of however much time that is. So I hope that answers your question. I think that it's kind of broad of what it could be, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does actually. I think you did a good job of answering almost straight away, actually, because at least for me, the way that I try to frame these types of things is because you said this makes you feel more complete, which I think was like a really important piece of information, because usually I associate that feeling with being able to like hold to your values. So if your value is obviously to be an amazing player, and you know what it takes to do that. So for you to follow through on the values, like you have to have certain principles to honor the values. And so that's discipline. Like if you don't, like I imagine if you don't follow through, if you don't hold to the principle of following through on extracting all the value from these various things that you might be doing that you think are going to help, you're going to feel bad. You're going to feel less fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, for sure. Because like if the days where I wouldn't, I would feel really bad about, because I know what I can be doing and everything that goes into that, and like being like the best player possible. Like you have to like stay consistent at it. You have to do like your routines. But I also have like an element of not being too hard on myself either. Like I know that I can't be playing like X amount of things per day, because it's just going to burn me out over a long period of time. So maybe some days, I'm satisfied with, maybe just like 2 POV demos and a little bit less individual time, because I don't know, maybe I was busy that day. Maybe I'm on a plane or something like that. Like I'm not going to feel bad if I had to travel for, 15 hours. On the plane, I usually will watch like POVs before like I do chill time. So maybe I have like 2 or 3 hours where I watch stuff and I'm writing notes. And after that's done, now I know that I can relax my mind a bit. So I think it's just like a good balance of like knowing how much that you can do, and how much it feels, how much until like it feels complete for you for that day, and being happy with like that process.
Yeah, that I think that makes total sense to me, and I think it's what's really interesting is it's all really simple, but I think that the places that people trip up, and I've tripped up myself too in the past many times, is because like some of these simple things are pretty hard. Like you have to be like everything you just said requires like honesty and awareness. It's really easy not to be honest with yourself sometimes. Not like intentionally. I don't think anyone's really intentionally trying to lie to themselves, but we do kind of, again, go into psychology a bit. Sometimes we deflect things, or we project things, or we deny things, or we rationalize things. It's harder for us to like just look at it for the honest truth, because that might be painful. It might be painful to like, like the truth might be, I'm so exhausted. I don't want to do this right now. I want to break. And that's how you feel. But can you be honest with that feeling? Or, so it's very difficult sometimes to differentiate when you're rationalizing something and lying to yourself essentially, or and making excuse. And is that honest? Can you differentiate those two things? So that's where I think the trickiness is. And some people also like the awareness it's like has to be trained. You got to practice being aware. And that's, I think, so do you have any feelings on your awareness? Do you think that's something that you've done a good job with because you're so analytical? Is that like part of it?
I mean, I think it's good and bad. I think that sometimes being like this analytical is a hindrance, and that's when like perfectionism and stuff is obviously like on the par for the course of this topic. So I try to And that's why Jared is like helped so much, because when you learn that perfection is never something you're going to obtain, and you know that it's like a fool's errand of something that you think that you can do but you just can't, because your definition of perfection is always changing, and what is the best today isn't the best in 6 months. That's usually just how it is. Like something that's good right now, probably there's a better way for it, whether it's in 6 months or 9 months, 2 years, there will be a better way. So I think just like trying not to be too harsh on yourself, I think is important. Like for people that are like me, that are analytical and thinking about all these things, because you can always get into like analysis paralysis of like, oh, if I can't get my whole routine done, then I'm not good enough. And then you have like bad self-talk, like I'm not good enough, I'm doing bad, I know I could do better. And once you start having those things, now you're just being mean to yourself, and that it hurts. It hurts like when you have bad self-talk, and I've seen the negatives of it from other players and myself, of when you're speaking bad to yourself, whether that's in the game or something that you're doing outside of the game, it's going to affect you at some point or another. So I think trying not to be too harsh on yourself is a big thing.
And it's funny actually, because that example is one that can be commonly rationalized, because some people might say, oh well, this is how I, because I'm hard on myself, that's why I succeed. But at the same time, they're not being necessarily honest with the impact that actually has on them. The extra pressure, your confidence will be more flimsy if you're adding all that extra negativity on top of yourself. So it's like it is comfortable for you, like most coping mechanisms are, but that is like typically some form of like a coping mechanism for a lot of people, because it helps them to keep them safe. Or this is me going a little bit too deep on the psychological spectrum here, but it is sometimes the case that this happens because people feel like it's safer if they critique themselves, then it protects them from being critiqued externally otherwise, because they've already done it first. So it kind of like insulates you a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like a really dangerous thing, especially for, these types of people and, myself, because that is exactly the type of bad things that you could do, especially if you have something you think is good, right? And you think you have like the secret sauce to like what makes you you, and you don't have the time for it like this day, and you don't have the time for it like 3 days later, and then you have a match like in 6 days, and due to things that whether they're in your control or not, you weren't able to do it. And then now you have less confidence in the game, and now you're telling yourself, oh, like, well, I know why I'm bad, it's because I didn't do this. And I don't know, like you have like a really bad spiral of things like just getting kind of out of hand from like the mental perspective of it. So it's important to keep it in check for sure.
Yeah, it's so deep. I know I could talk to you about this, Ollie, for quite a long time, so, and I want to be respectful of your time. And there is one last sort of area I want to hit, because you mentioned Jocko Willink's books earlier, and I read through. I'd read Extreme Ownership a long time ago when it came out, but very recently I read all of the following books like in sequence, and they're amazing. And these are the books that, like, again, if I end up being in a GM position, I want to take all of my team through, all of the coaches and whoever. And the reason is because like the whole like concept of the dichotomy of leadership, I think is so important in these team environments. And I think that both management and leadership is oftentimes where things always fall apart. Especially if you want to instill a good culture, you have to have people that understand these two other areas too, to be able to effectively like lead and manage that. So for me, it seems like quite a fundamental. So from your perspective as a player, like what are some of your favorite sort of learnings that you got from reading some of these Jocko Willink books?
Well, I think the two, which are obviously the titles of the books, is one, the extreme ownership. So that it definitely helps a lot once you have people that are taking ownership for an idea going wrong or right, because then now you can start getting into the process of was it the right decision, and who's responsible for that decision. And I think that's really important, because sometimes like when you have like these systems where you don't have anyone kind of taking responsibility, and it's like this shared responsibility, then the process of fixing whatever that decision was that's not going right, it kind of gets muddied. And I think that it's really important that you have someone that is taking responsibility for that. And it's something that I think that Yekindar also was really adamant about too, which I noted. He did a really good job at it when he was like calling strats, and that was kind of like an example for me of when you do make these like wrong calls, like someone has to like have the responsibility for like I made that call, that's my bad, we're going to move on from it. Or if you want to be mad at somebody, like you can be mad at this guy, we're going to like fix this call, like you can be mad at me, like I made the call. So I think just like having that responsibility, because otherwise you I feel like you don't fix issues if you don't have someone taking responsibility for certain issues. And at the end of the day, it's always like the leaders that are going to be having that most of the time. And it helps a lot for like the learning process of that. And then I'd say the second part is like the dichotomy of leadership, of how, actually I'd say it's more of how you distribute leadership within the team. And I think one thing that they were honing in a lot of is, when you have, your general isn't going to be taking leadership of the micro of, some platoon that's like going into, some enemy base, for example. There's going to be some squad leader, platoon leader that's going to be, taking responsibility for how things are going in there. And that's something that I try to do a lot, especially like with my calling and like how I like making calls, like on CT side, for example. And what I did in Cole a lot is I felt the more that I tried to be granular, what I think is like the best micro for a certain push or a certain reclear of an area, if it wasn't my area specifically, and I'm saying like, hey, we need to do this, I prefer for that to be more general. Like when I say it, I'm like, I think that we need to do this, and then it's up to them, one of them like that is part of that push or aggression, re-aggression, whatever it is. They now have the chance to be the leader of that situation. And I think that's super important. I think that it helps a lot because you don't necessarily know what is the best if you're not there. You might like you can know that this is a good time macro wise to be doing this push, but you're not necessarily going to know the best way to do it. Sometimes you will, maybe just from like past results or from ante or prep or whatever it is, how the game's been going. You might have a good idea, but I'd say the way that I like to call those rounds in general is giving just making it open for them to take responsibility of like how they want to do it. So I think that those two concepts are probably like the best things that I got from those books.
So much good stuff. Yeah, I definitely recommend everyone read them. And I love the sort of in-game examples there. It was one of my many takeaways as well, like the whole idea of everyone is a leader, everyone can be led type of thing. And I think for anyone who's like this is my sell usually for the books of Jocko Willink, because when I first like discovered some of that material, I was like, oh wow, the analog here I think is really good for esports, because the Navy SEALs, well, they are the most elite kind of small units where each individual tends to be specialized as well, and they still have like a leadership, a command structure, and the whole point is that yeah, everybody needs to follow the leader, but at the same time, every person has their own individual expertise, and the good leadership is often getting out of the way of your teammates, but those people also understanding how they can lead in certain scenarios, and then how everyone also otherwise follows. And it reminds me of like that lightning in the bottle sometimes that you see at the super top level, at the championship, like trophy matches, where you've got a team where everyone's so in sync with one another too, that everyone's actually, or they're all doing this. Like you'll have a teammate that does something in a situation that's so dynamic. It's not like you've drilled this and someone's picked up a role, someone's taken initiative, and you just instantly know precisely how to support them. And then it might switch. And so I love the analog there. I think it's really powerful. And I think it's also the lessons are great for life too. So I want everyone to buy these books. trying to sell them super hard here. Not getting commission, but
that also kind of ties into Blue Lock as well. I don't know if you've watched it, but that's like talking about ego, what we were talking about before, of like when everyone is striving to be like the guy, like the best player on the team, like you're going to be put into situations like you're saying before that you didn't necessarily rehearse, but like when everyone is trying to shine, like you get put in these situations where you can make something really incredible happen. And I think that's the really cool thing of like watching Blue Lock is like ego is not necessarily a bad thing, and just because like someone's trying to shine doesn't mean you can't like recognize the situation of like when you need to be like the supporting cast for somebody else that's like making the play. And that's why it's actually like a really cool show, because like it's pretty much everyone's trying to be like the best striker, but you know, they have to be on a team where they're playing different roles and they all want to shine. But at certain points, you're going to have to like recognize like the play and play off your teammates, and you're going to have like some really cool situations because of this mindset that everyone has.
It's like a fun duality of like, yeah, you're an individual, and that's actually really important. Don't forget that. But you're also serving a mission, and the mission is more than you. Than any individual. Exactly. So it's like it's fun. Man, I could talk to you for ages, but we've been talking for quite a while. So I want to wrap up here. Thank you so much for your time. I always really enjoy our conversations. Always gives me a lot to think about. I hope everyone at home enjoyed it as well. And dude, best of luck with FaZe. I am so excited to see what the year's going to look like for you. And I just can't wait I just can't wait. I just can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you asking me. It was super fun. It's always fun talking about this type of stuff. So I really appreciate it as well. And I appreciate it. So yeah, thank you.